Well, let's move on to another posting from Tatenda Kufko, who is originally from Zimbabwe but is now living in Malawi, and he writes, I really don't see the point of President Obama's trip. It is a little bit too late. Africans are now too clever for the Western countries. They will not get anything out of Africa. And finally, Francis Doto Mulunge from Morogoro in Tanzania says, President Obama's trip is all about the economic battle against China. Well, Shaka, I think you mentioned that earlier, or your guest mentioned that earlier, and there was a lot of talk about that as well in our social media platforms, that President Obama was in Africa because of the Chinese presence on the continent. Although I have to say, it's not just China these days. There is India, there's Brazil, Russia, and many other European countries. And I believe he was asked that question during the town hall meeting in South Africa, where President Obama stated that it wasn't really the case. In fact, I think I remember what he said. He said, the more the merrier. That's what he said. Shaka?
Yeah, I think he definitely had a point. Isn't it really a great challenge and perhaps, in fact, even a greater opportunity for African leaders, frankly, to figure out how to deal with these emerging powers, plus, of course, the lone superpower, the United States, really?
Well, certainly, I don't think that there is a competition as such between the United States and China, and certainly not the other countries of the BRICS countries. That said, there is a comparison to be made. And the comparison is, while China has given strategic attention to sub-Saharan Africa, the United States over the last 4 years has been largely absent. And that's especially true at the level of the president. So I think that the comparison is not a favorable one at this point in time. But I agree with President Obama that, you know, the more countries that are trading and engaging with Africa, investing in Africa, and the more companies, private sector, corporations and others, small business people who are engaging, it's good for Africa and it's good for the world.
What about you, Kwasi?
Well, I may be biased.
You're a businessman after all.
But I believe that the continent of the future is Africa. And therefore, it is not surprising that people from other continents want to come to Africa. Most natural resources can be found in Africa, including human resource, which is fantastic, which many people don't recognize. And I'm sure that people, whether it's in America or wherever else, they do know that Africans are here and they're doing well. But Africans need to be in Africa and do well for Africa. So I believe that it is important that Africa engages, but engages on its own terms and engages in a way that makes Africa benefit. So if the United States of America wants to be in Africa, it does not need to worry about competition from the Chinese or anybody else. It just must come there and do what is right and what will form the kind of partnership that would engender trade. As a business person, I was educated here. I became a professional in consulting here. And therefore, I do know how Americans do business. But it's unfortunate that Americans don't find it necessary to engage actively in Africa, invest a lot more in Africa, because they will find that a lot of people on the continent speak English, understand the values, and indeed also understand entrepreneurship, except that they need good examples. And I think many good examples can be found from the United States of America, but it has to be done, again, on the principle of partnership, not one leading the other.
Now, Jenda, you have interacted with Africa for a very long time, both in your capacity as a senior government official and in your other non-governmental capacities. You went to school with the Africans. You definitely know that the intellectual balance of power has been shifting in the favor of Africans. Why is it that Africa is not stepping up to the plate, really?
Well, I think Africa is. I think that if you look at every measure, every indicator, Africa's doing better now than it was 10 years ago and better than 10 years prior to that. whether you're talking about on the governance and institution building side. Many of these countries have new constitutions, they have younger leaders. So the old image of the strong man that I think President Obama and others evoke, I think is problematic. What Africa needs are strong institutions and strong leaders and strong civil society, strong communities. So I think it's false to talk about, the big man characterization of Africa today. Whether you look at the economic side, African economies are growing and growing faster than most economies in the world, and certainly faster than economies in Europe and the United States itself. There's a lot to be done yet. American investors should come to Africa. They're not going to come to a place where, they have to take a very, very long time to get decisions made, right? So there are inefficiencies in Africa. They want to come to a continent where the labor force is productive. I would have liked President Obama, in addition to talking about students getting scholarships, to come to the United States on his youth leadership for public governance and public management, to come for science, technology, engineering, computer science. I am at Carnegie Mellon University, and I can tell you, which is a science-oriented university and an innovative university, many of our students are from China, from South Korea, from India. So a lot of Asian students, very few students from Africa. And if you're going to talk about really innovating the future of the continent in terms of the economic productivity of that region, then you need people in the sciences and in math. And so put as much emphasis on that and on business, young entrepreneurs, as you do on governance and, a path to basically government versus a path to wealth through entrepreneurship, through invention, through science and technology.
I see. Well, unfortunately, time happens not to be our best ally, but I'll come back to you. Mariama, very frank comments, of course, as you heard from the audience. Anything more?
Well, there was also some talk about him not visiting Kenya as well. And of course, Mrs. Fraser mentioned it earlier. Was it because of the ICC indictment of Kenyatta and Ruto? Some ask. But the reasons President Obama gave were that he's been in his father's land many times, of course, not as president, but he wanted to spread the wealth. Well, unfortunately, that's all the feedback we have for now. We appreciate all the responses. Please keep them coming. And before I go, just a reminder, we would like to hear from you. So drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com, or post your comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, and you can also join our YouTube channel. Just subscribe to VOA TV to Africa.